New York City's Fifth Avenue, one of the premier, if not the premier, urban shopping streets in the world. But if you go back in time, you just might notice something that simply does not exist on modern-day Fifth Avenue. It is the double-decker bus. This is the story of the last of the great Fifth Avenue double-deckers, the Queen Mary, Queen of Fifth Avenue. Hi, this is Jeffrey, and in this video, we're going to take a look at a brief history of the 720 and 735 type yellow coach buses that ran in both New York City and Chicago. These were the ultimate double-decker buses of their time. Now, as for their run in New York City, which was between 1936 and 1953, they really became a symbol of New York City, and they were also known as the Queen Mary, the Queen of Fifth Avenue. Now, even though they ran in Chicago, they really did not become such an iconic symbol of that city. However, Chicago was actually very instrumental in the development of the 720 type bus. So let's get started in looking at the history of this really fabulous double-decker, the last double-deckers that ran in New York City as well as Chicago. One of the most well-known bus companies of decades past in New York was the Fifth Avenue Coach Company. Started in 1885 as the Fifth Avenue Transportation Company with horse-drawn omnibuses, the company experimented with a gasoline-electric single-decker bus in 1905, and shortly thereafter, it imported a standard London General bus of the time, a de Dion Bouton with a 34-seat double-deck LGOC body. The bus was an immediate hit. Double-deckers were seen as the way of the future for the now renamed Fifth Avenue Coach Company. Fast forward to 1933. By this time, the Chicago Motor Coach Company and the Fifth Avenue Coach Company were owned by the same entity, the Omnibus Corporation. The period of the late 1920s and early 1930s was to be one of extraordinary advances in American bus design by many companies. Two in particular would allow the double-decker to move in a brand new direction. First was the Pickwick Night Coach of California. The second was when the Chicago Motor Coach Company took delivery of a radical new transit bus design, the Model 706. The development of this rear-engined double-decker was in part stimulated by the need to create attractive new buses to maintain and build ridership after the 1932 economic slump. By the standards of the day, it looked incredible. The single-type 706 was exhibited at the Chicago World's Fair of 1933 and entered service as Chicago Motor Coach's Fleet Number 103. It quickly showed that it represented the way forward. When the production version of the 706 followed later that year, this time designated the Model 720, it incorporated a number of changes, such as Dwight Austin's angle drive and the GM 707 six-cylinder petrol engine, producing 165 British horsepower at 2,000 RPM, which gave a useful increase in power. As for the body, the lower deck window line was dropped in the wheelbase to give passengers a better view, and the upper deck sliding windows were replaced with glazing with top vents. After some in-service testing revealed delays in unloading passengers, a second narrow exit door was fitted ahead of the rear wheels. The pre-production Model 720 entered service as Chicago's number 104 after spending some time in New York to prove its suitability for Fifth Avenue's operations. In 1936, production began at Yellow Coach's factory in Pontiac, Michigan. Chicago Motor Coach and Fifth Avenue each received 100 buses. These big buses were not cheap, costing $20,000 each. That's equivalent to about $425,000 today, but still less than a modern single-decker bus, which comes in at about $500,000. Fifth Avenue had looked into whether the new buses could be run with more headroom in the upper deck along routes that had no clearance problems. This led to the Model 735, which appeared exactly identical to the 720, except that the roof had a more pronounced curvature, allowing a headroom of 68 inches over the gangway, the same as contemporary British regulations stipulated. This took the overall height to 13 feet 5 inches. The buses were 96 inches wide and 35 feet long. 75 buses of the first New York order were 735s. Further batches arrived in 1938 when Fifth Avenue took delivery of 25 Model 735s and 35 Model 720s. Chicago went on to receive another 40 Model 720s. These later builds featured revised battery and fuel tank locations to reduce the risk of fires, a situation which had in fact destroyed two of the early Chicago buses in 1937. One interesting distinction between the Chicago and New York buses was that the seats of the Chicago fleet were 2 inches wider than those on the Fifth Avenue buses, apparently because riders in the Windy City were larger and wider than their Big Apple cousins. That meant the gangways were 4 inches narrower, which must have made things a bit uncomfortable for the standees. In New York, the new buses quickly became a symbol of the city. Their length and size led them to being referred as to the Queen Marys after the world's largest ocean liner, which had recently begun transatlantic service. Also painted green up to the belt rail and cream up to the roof like their Chicago counterparts, their side slogan was "See New York, the Wonder City." Whereas the Chicago Motor Company ran a service based on low fares and the lowest possible operating costs, Fifth Avenue marketed itself as a premium service, charging 10 cents a ride. No standing passengers were allowed, which meant that to cope with peak hour passenger loads, a significant number of extra buses had to be placed into service. The ban of standees, the need for conductors, and routes with heavy traffic congestion meant that Fifth Avenue costs, across its whole fleet, were 51 cents a mile compared with 32 cents in Chicago. The last Fifth Avenue bus, number 2124, went back to Pontiac in 1939 to be fitted with a diesel engine and automatic transmission combination in place of its petrol engine and semi-automatic gearbox. It ran for a short time in Philadelphia before returning to New York. It is speculated that it also ran in Chicago because the Chicago Motor Coach Company converted all 40 of its second batch of 720s to diesel hydraulic in 1941, whereas only 25 Fifth Avenue examples were converted. After the war, the double-deck fleets in New York and Chicago came under increasing pressure. Ridership meant that the high seating capacity was unnecessary, and slow boarding and poor acceleration continued to hinder operation. The new single-deckers, such as the GM TDH 4507, were economical and powerful, and the big double-deckers looked and felt worn out after years of intensive service. In New York, this was not helped by the decision in 1947 to fit a metal blanking panel across the lower half of the upper deck front windows to prevent passengers from falling out. The last Fifth Avenue example was retired on the 27th of April, 1953. The future was with big single-decker buses. Only a few passed on to other operators. 2 735s ran in Philadelphia, and a further 17 went to 2 small operators in New York and New Jersey. Fortunately, the New York MTA retained a 735 for its historical bus fleet, which is part of the New York Transit Museum. Number 2124, also still known as the Queen Mary, partially restored, has been brought out on special occasions such as the annual Brooklyn Bus Festival. It is always a favorite amongst enthusiasts and the general public. And that's the story of the Fifth Avenue Coach Company 720 and 735 double-deckers. So there you have it, a little history of the last great vintage double-decker buses in America. Now, as you saw in the video, there is one Type 735 that is preserved by the New York City Transit Authority, which is number 2124. And that bus is often brought out on special occasions. It used to be exhibited at the Brooklyn Bus Festival, but I don't think it has been at the festivals in recent years because they changed the location to one that is just not favorable for that type of bus. And as you can see, I got to go in it and I photographed it as much as possible. I think the top deck was off limits when I was photographing it at the time. You could only go in the lower deck. But at least I got photographs of it because it's not put out on display as much as it used to be. Now, also at the Brooklyn Bus Festival, they gave out these maps of the routes of the Fifth Avenue Coach Company. They gave these out for free. I got a whole bunch of them. I even framed a couple of them. And what's interesting is that on eBay, they're going for like $60 each now for something that they gave out for free. So I thought that was kind of interesting to see. Now, another little tidbit about these buses that I've read, I don't know how true it is, but it said that each of the New York Queen Mary buses racked up about 1 million miles each over their entire lifespan. So that was a pretty interesting piece of information. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this look at the 720 and 735 double-decker Queen Mary buses that ran in New York City and Chicago. And as always, thank you so much for watching and have a great day. Bye.